Britain destroyed every urban tram system it had. Thousands of trams, burned, scrapped and erased. Exposed rails pulled from the cobblestones while the crowds were still walking home. No other country in Europe did this. What follows are 15 routes that vanished, most within living memory. I have gone through government surveys, consumer reports, parliamentary records, transport industry data, and the testimony of drivers themselves to bring you 15 motorway service stations where something is deeply and genuinely wrong. Let us begin in Glasgow, because Glasgow was the last major city in Britain to run its trams. And the farewell Glasgow gave them was unlike anything seen before or since. An estimated 250,000 people took to the streets on the 4th of September, 1962. There was an impending sense of loss, of desolation in the air, as the era of the cars came to an end. In 1947, more than 1,200 trams crisscrossed the city. On Renfield Street, the service was so intensive that a tram would pass every 12.5 seconds. For many years, Glasgow ran the second largest tramway in the country, with over 100 route miles, served by over 1,000 trams. That evening, a procession of trams from the system's 90-year history left Dalmarnock Depot at 6:30. It was led by the first horse-drawn cars that had been introduced in 1872. The procession passed through Argyle Street, Hope Street, St Vincent Street, and Renfield Street to Pollokshields. A huge crowd watched the trams enter the Copler Hill car works for the last time. It was pouring with rain. It made no difference. 250,000 Glaswegians stood in the downpour to say goodbye. Many ducked down to place a penny on the tracks so it would be squashed by the passing wheels. A small copper keepsake pressed flat by the weight of something that was never coming back. Those who took a spot at Copler Hill remembered there being not a dry eye in the house. The Coronation Tram, loved for its Art Deco elegance and improved comfort, was the final one in service. Volunteers are still restoring these trams today. Glasgow has never quite forgiven itself. Now south to London. And this one surprises people because London's trams are almost entirely forgotten. But the capital once ran one of the largest networks in Britain. In 1935, the system consisted of 328 miles of route, 2,560 tramcars, 101 routes, 32 depots. Beneath Holborn, there is a tunnel that most Londoners walk past without knowing what it is. The Kingsway Tramway subway opened its first section in 1906, eventually running from Theobald's Road to the Victoria Embankment. It was Britain's only major underground tram tunnel. It allowed cross-city routes when before they had all stopped at termini on the edge of the city centre. You can walk past the sealed entrances today. The stone archways are still visible. Most Londoners have no idea what lies beneath their feet. London's last tram week ran from the 29th of June to the 5th of July, 1952. It was the end of a 3-year programme called Operation Tramaway, which replaced South London's entire tram network with diesel buses. The trams had been enormously popular. In South London, they accounted for the majority of local journeys. On the last day, large crowds gathered to see the final trams and take one last ride. The Feltham double-decker tram had been designed with as much care as would later be given to the Routemaster bus. But unlike the Routemaster, the Feltham was never mass-produced. London's half-hearted modernisation went the same way as everywhere else. There were no trams at all in London between 1952 and the year 2000. 48 years of nothing. An entire generation grew up and grew old without ever riding a tram in the capital. Manchester was even earlier, the first major city in the United Kingdom to completely abandon its trams. January 1949. Before the 50s had even begun, Manchester had decided the tram was finished. At its peak In 1928, Manchester Corporation tramways carried 328 million passengers on 953 trams, 46 routes, 292 miles of track. It was the second largest tram network after London. The last tram would have run in 1940 had the war not intervened. After the war, after austerity, after shortages of new buses, the very last one clanked into the depot in January 1949. A BBC film crew was on hand. Then the trams were driven under their own power from Birchfield's Road depot to Hyde Road. That is where they were to be disposed of. The metal fittings were stripped. The glass was removed for recycling. What remained was a wooden body on a heavy steel base. And the trams in this condition were simply set alight to burn off the wood so the steel could be sold for scrap. The words "Last Tram" chalked on the side of car 1007 did not save it from the fire. Set alight. The trams that had carried 300 million passengers a year were burned in a yard in Ardwick. When Metrolink opened in 1992, Vehicle 1007 was chosen as the number for the first new tram. Even the new system could not forget. The great cities mourned their trams publicly. But some cities did not go quietly. Some fought. Sheffield was the last city in England to operate trams, and Sheffield did not want to let them go. The first tram ran in 1873. Electric trams began in 1899. At its greatest extent, 100 miles of tram routes crossed the city. The reason for their popularity was simple geography. Sheffield is known as the City of Seven Hills. The centre lies in a valley. Many suburbs sit on steep ground above it. Early motor buses struggled with the gradients. Trams were ideal for this terrain. Several protests broke out when the closure was announced. Sheffield folk were fond of their trams and did not take kindly to losing them. Residents and traders on Home Lane delivered a petition to the council. It was unsuccessful. What makes Sheffield's story particularly bitter is that the city was still building new trams when the decision to scrap the system had already been taken. Car 536 entered service on the 11th of April 1952. It was the last tram ever constructed for Sheffield. It represented the ultimate development of the traditional British four-wheel tram. The class worked for only 10 years. The original closure date was to have been April 1966, but the bus conversion program was sped up so aggressively that the last trams actually ran on Saturday the 8th of October 1960. The newest of the Roberts cars were barely 8 years old. Brand new trams, scrapped within a decade. An illuminated car followed by a procession of 14 trams carried passengers and council dignitaries from Bow Chief to the Tinsley depot. Thousands watched. In the rain. Again. Leeds tells perhaps the most frustrating story of all. Leeds had one of the largest and most advanced urban transport systems in the country. The city was developing new tramcars and opening new lines right up until the closure. It had introduced Britain's first overhead-powered electric trams back in 1891. When London decided to scrap its Feltham trams, Leeds saw an opportunity. In the early 1950s, Leeds purchased 90 Feltham trams second-hand from London Transport. They dated from 1931. They were still excellent vehicles. The closure of the tramway is widely considered short-sighted. The majority of the network ran on reserved track and did not interfere with the road system at all. The system closed on the 7th of November 1959. The people of Leeds have tried multiple times since the 1980s to get their tramway back. Every attempt has failed. The proposed Leeds Supertram was planned, designed, and consulted upon, then killed by a funding shortfall from central government. Leeds remains one of the largest cities in Western Europe without a rapid transit system. The central tram shed on Swinegate was used as a concert hall after the closure and became a renowned music venue. It was demolished in 1989. The site is now a car park. From trams to music to nothing. That is the story of British transport planning in 3 acts. Edinburgh's trams were unique. The city's terrain was so steep that expansion was significantly limited in certain areas. It is said that as many as 5 horses were required to tackle the formidable slopes of the new town. In January 1888, this problem was solved with the advent of a cable-hauled system, a method already in use in San Francisco. The cables ran in a channel in the middle of the track. They were driven by steam from 4 power stations. There was a peculiar complication at the boundary between Edinburgh and Leith. Passengers had to change trams at Pilrig on Leith Walk, cable drawn on one side, electric on the other. This confused exchange was known locally as the Pilrig Muddle. The decision to close Edinburgh's 47 route miles came in 1952. It took just 4 years to dismantle the entire system. The final day fell on the 16th of November 1956. That evening, a procession of tram cars made its way from the Braids terminus to Shrub Hill Depot in Leith, taking in much of the original 1871 route. 10 trams were laid on due to the overwhelming demand for tickets. One of the cars contained the very city councillors who had voted to close the system in the first place. Edinburgh did eventually get its trams back in 2014, after a project so plagued by delays and overspending that it became a national joke. The irony is not lost on anyone. Those were cities with hundreds of miles of track and hundreds of thousands of riders. But some of the tram routes that vanished were smaller, more intimate, and in some ways their loss cut deeper. These were the lines that ran along the coast, through the holiday towns, past the places where people went to be happy. This is the one that should make you angry. The Swansea and Mumbles Railway in Wales was the world's first passenger tram. The Mumbles Railway Act was passed by the British Parliament in 1804. The first horse-drawn passenger service started operating in 1807. It was worked by steam from 1877 and then from 1929 by very large 106-seater electric tramcars. 153 years of continuous operation. It held the record as the world's longest-serving railway and still holds the record for the highest number of forms of traction of any railway in the world. Horse-drawn, sail power, steam power, electric power, diesel and petrol. The Swansea public were outraged at the announcement to dismantle their railway. A campaign launched immediately. 15,000 signatures were collected on a petition. The Mumbles Pier Amusement Equipment Company hired a barrister to oppose the case in Parliament. He withdrew within 12 hours of the hearing. Another barrister was hired. There was not enough time to brief him on the full facts of the case. Parliament approved the destruction. On the evening of the 4th of January 1960, the population of Swansea took to the streets dressed in black. They carried a false coffin through the streets of Mumbles in a funeral procession for their railway. At 11:42 the next morning, the last journey of the world's first railway service began. A trumpet sounded, and the world's press watched. Children threw coins onto the track so the wheels would press them flat as keepsakes. Within a very short time of the tram returning to its Rutland Street base, workers began dismantling the track. The route is now Oystermouth Road, choked with traffic on a daily basis. Perhaps now, stuck in that traffic, we might regret what was done. On the North Wales coast, the Llandudno and Colwyn Bay Electric Railway operated a tramway service between Llandudno and Colwyn Bay from 1907. The grandiose title did not match the company's finances. Many of the trams came second-hand from other towns with narrow gauge systems. It was a seaside line, and the sea was its enemy. Storms in January 1952 caused substantial damage. Repairs were carried out, but storms the following year did just as much damage again. In 1954, the company applied for a license to convert to motor buses. The local councils objected. There was nothing they could do. The line closed on the 24th of March, 1956. Tram number 8 was reserved for the official party. For the final stretch, the mayor of Colwyn Bay drove the tram himself. It arrived back at the depot after midnight. The last privately owned street tramway in Britain ceased operations after almost 50 years, watched by a large crowd standing in the dark. Today, a replica tram is towed through the streets on a lorry during Christmas parades and local festivals. Not running on rails, just remembered. The Grimsby and Immingham Electric Railway was a working line. No seaside promenades, no tourists. It carried dockworkers between the town of Grimsby and the deep water port at Immingham. It opened in 1912, the same year the dock itself opened. The trams ran along a reserved track beside the road through flat Lincolnshire landscape, past allotments and terraced houses. It was the last traditional electric tramway to close in England outside Blackpool, shutting in 1961. Nobody held a procession. The workers simply caught the bus from then on. We have covered 9 routes now, and a pattern is becoming clear. Crowds came out to mourn. Councils promised buses would be better. The tracks were torn up before the last tram was coaled. What follows are 6 more cities that lost their trams in the same brutal decade. I am going through them more quickly now. Not because they matter less, but because the speed of the losses was itself part of the tragedy. They came one after another, city after city, and nobody could stop it. Liverpool said goodbye in 1957. The city that built ocean liners could not find the will to maintain its tram lines. The system had once been one of the most extensive in the northwest. Routes reached deep into the suburbs and along the waterfront. The last tram ran on the 14th of September. A procession followed the same pattern as the others. Crowds in the dark, flashbulbs popping, the sound of wheels on wet track for the final time. When Merseyrail expanded in later decades, the old tram corridors were not used. They had already been built over. Birmingham closed its trams on the 4th of July 1953. At its peak, Birmingham Corporation tramways operated over 80 miles of route. The Bristol Road, the Hagley Road, the Stratford Road. Lines that served hundreds of thousands of commuters daily. All replaced by buses in a conversion program that took just 6 years. The depot at Whitton was demolished. The reserved track along the Bristol Road, which could have formed the basis of a modern light rail line, was handed over to motor traffic. Birmingham would not get trams back until the Midland Metro opened in 1999, serving a fraction of the original network. Aberdeen closed in 1958. The Granite City had run its trams since 1874. Electric trams from 1899. The system was compact but vital. The last tram, number 19, completed its final journey to the Bridge of Dee depot on the 3rd of May. The decision to close was made despite the network still being profitable. The council simply judged that buses were the future. They were wrong. But by the time anyone admitted it, the tracks had been under tarmac for decades. Sunderland closed in 1954. What makes Sunderland notable is the speed. The decision was taken, and the system dismantled with remarkable efficiency. Routes that connected the seafront, the shipyards, and the residential streets of Roker and Seaburn were severed overnight. Sunderland's trams had been distinctive for their circular route system, which allowed continuous riding without changing. The buses that replaced them did not offer this. Residents who had lived their entire lives with the sound of trams outside their windows woke one morning to silence. The silence, several have noted in oral history interviews, was the hardest part. Across the water, Belfast closed its trams on the 28th of February, 1954. The Belfast Corporation tramways had operated since 1905, but the system had been declining since the 1930s. Wartime bombing damaged several routes. The decision to convert to buses was taken before the war ended. Belfast's last tram ran from Ardoyne to the city centre. The depot at Short Strand was cleared within weeks. Belfast's streets are narrow, and its politics complicated. Trams have never returned. The city relies on buses to this day, despite periodic proposals for light rail that never progress beyond consultation documents gathering dust in council offices. And in the same year that Edinburgh fell silent, just across the Firth of Tay, Dundee said farewell as well. Dundee's system was smaller than most, but it had served the city since 1877. The trams carried jute workers to the mills, shoppers to the high street, families to Broughty Ferry on summer Saturdays. The closure on the 20th of October, 1956, was the end of something most Dundonians had assumed was permanent. The tracks were pulled up, the depot was demolished, the trams were scrapped. The route to Broughty Ferry is now the A930, clogged with traffic every weekend. Nobody gets to the beach any faster than they did in 1920. 15 routes, 15 cities. They kept what we burned: Amsterdam, Zurich, Vienna, Prague. Every British city that ripped its trams out is now spending billions trying to put them back. The tracks are still there, buried under the tarmac, and waiting.